Well, she was a pop artist, which I guess is not much different from what Led Zeppelin would have been at the time, more or less. Oh, God, I hope I don't regret saying that.
Well, hello, welcome to the Remote No Pressure Podcast. Very excited to be here today. How are you, Bill?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good. Did you have to use your four-wheel drive to get here today?
I got all-wheel drive on my truck, so it's always engaged. But yeah, it was a very useful tool today coming in. Yeah,
we traded in our all-wheel drive Highlander for a Toyota Corolla.
Are you kicking yourself on a day like today?
Yeah, I'm all about like the gas mileage,
Yeah.
and we were gonna get like what's that hybrid? The Toyota hybrid car, the Prius.
The Prius.
But like I didn't fit. I'm not that tall, but
Yeah.
like I could barely fit in the back seat. I'm like, this isn't gonna work.
There was a time a couple years ago I was actually considering taking a job 40 miles away, and I was like, maybe I'll just get a Prius and just like the electric Prius, just drive that back and forth and save all that money on gas. What a good human being I would be.
Yes. Yes. Well, we ended up getting an eco version of the Toyota Corolla.
And you probably get pretty decent mileage too, like 40 plus.
Yeah, like 40 miles a gallon.
Yeah.
But it has like no pickup whatsoever. It's like,
That's tough.
I went from all-wheel drive to this little dinker car, and I'm like, man. So stay tuned. I'll probably end up getting another four-wheel drive here in the next couple of weeks.
I'm thinking about buying a pickup myself, just to something to beat on the weekends in the summer.
Let me ask you this question. What's your favorite movie from the 80s?
Oh, man. From the 80s? Mm-hmm. Oh, it would have to be, well, just because I don't think about that a lot, because the 80s is a different decade.
Sure.
But things started coming into their own. The movies started getting better special effects,
Right.
that kind of stuff. But the two big ones that come to mind are like Back to the Future and Goonies, the classics.
Back to the Future and Goonies, those were both excellent movies.
Yes.
Now, my other question to you is, did you ever see the movie Red Dawn?
Actually, a couple years ago I did, yeah.
The original, or did you do the re?
I believe I watched the original because it had the Russians, correct? Or the
Russians.
The remake was about like North Korea, wasn't it?
Yes, or the Chinese or something like that.
Yeah.
But the original was about Russians, but also Mexicans, which I know is weird because the Mexicans were working with the Russians to take over the United States. They were speaking Spanish in the movie.
I remember that now, yeah.
I always thought it was the Russians because I hadn't seen it in like 25 years, 30 years or something, And then I watched it the other night and they're speaking Spanish. I'm like, what the heck? And it is. It's like the Mexicans are working with the Russians to take over the United States.
I was just thinking of another conspiracy theory that goes along with that. Have you ever heard of the Mandela effect?
No.
That is where you remember something different than how it actually is. And they're saying it's like history is changing as we go. Like life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. That's completely different than what is said in the movie. And they say, well, that's because history is changing. That's just a stupid, crazy conspiracy theory.
That's interesting.
I know. Like that comes from, everybody thought Nelson Mandela died in the 80s. And it's in history books and encyclopedias. My sister did a report in high school on it.
Really?
And he ended up dying like just 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
like,
it wasn't that long ago.
And yeah, that was just poor record keeping back in the day, but it turned into this huge conspiracy theory. If you look it up on YouTube, there's some just crazy videos about it. People legitimately feel that history is changing,
Oh my! Well, it's funny because I saw a thing with from Fox News with the picture of RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, saying basically to 2019. So it was like her birth year. I can't remember what it was through 2019. So it looked like she had died. And I bet they, maybe they were wishing that, but it's like, for Fox News because they hate
doing
RBG.
well right now.
No, she's not. But Fox News does not like RBG.
No, that's true.
And I was like, wow, that's pretty. Everyone talks about like fake news and liberal media. It's of both sides.
Absolutely. Yep. A couple weeks back, maybe it was only a week back with that whole BuzzFeed thing. Did you hear about that?
I didn't hear about it. No.
BuzzFeed was saying that Trump told Cohen, his ex-lawyer, to lie to Congress, and it turned out like, who's the head of the FBI now? Anyways, he came forward and said that's not true, and he's looking into Trump for all the other junk going on. But
right.
It's like that's not true. He didn't tell them to do that. That's a complete lie. Saying that was fake news, and that discredited like CNN and all these other the left side media accounts or media companies that were like saying, if this is true, he's going to get impeached, and if this is true, impeach him. And
wow,
yeah, just a crazy weekend, and it all ended up being false. And Mueller, is it Mueller? Yeah, I think Mueller came forward, who doesn't like Trump either, but he's like, this isn't true. Like,
oh my gosh. Well, it's funny because like I took a journalism class in high school, and they were very like anal about you need to know your.
Can you say anal on the podcast?
You need to be very you need to be very careful like with your sources. Make sure you cite them, make sure they're real, make sure all this other stuff. And because you open yourself up to libel cases, all this stuff, you know. And
whatever happened to all that? Right.
And now it's like you just say whatever, because like that kid with the American Indian, with the Native American, and he was a white, probably rich because he goes to Catholic school with a MAGA hat on.
Yep.
Everybody hates him anyways.
Yep.
And then this old school Native American guy is like beating a drum, right? So it comes out that was like not the whole story.
Yep.
And like
but
CNN,
you had all these
BuzzFeed,
stars.
They're all reporting it. It's like,
yep.
I hope those kids sue the crap out of those news for libel, because they were like trying to find out where this kid goes to college.
They did. Stars were giving out information on these kids, like their names and like where their school was and all this junk about them, like personal information. You know
what? It's one thing too. I mean, like, how many stupid things did you do when you were 13, 14 years old?
Oh, a lot. Yeah.
A lot. You're a dumb kid.
Yep.
But he's a minor.
Yeah.
He's a minor. Like, I've got a son. I'm white, and I can see my kid doing something stupid. And like, okay, don't be an idiot, but I don't want his life ruined because he was a dumb kid at one time. But these kids were, not, the whole story, that wasn't true.
I know.
And their lives are ruined.
And the Native American who came up and was beating the drum was trying to break up some... there's some other stuff going on in the background with some, was it Black Hebrews, it was called?
Yeah, the Black Israelites. Or, yeah, something like that.
And they were like saying some racist stuff towards the kids, so these Indians were just coming up to kind of break it up a little bit. But somebody captured the footage at the wrong time, and it looked completely racist.
Isn't that crazy?
Mm-hmm.
I just, I don't know. It just bugs me. I don't trust anybody or anything anymore.
I know.
I read one magazine, Reason, and that's where I get most of my news from. Or like something like, I don't know, more reputable than Fox News or CNN or something.
You can't trust any of them. And they're all reporting against each other also.
Oh, I know.
Like Fox News is always putting stuff out about CNN.
So we live in a very conservative area.
Yep.
We need to get to that interview, whatever. But we're like, okay, so, someone called Trump an MF not that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm at breakfast at the local diner here in town, right? And it's like 9:00 in the morning, and I'm working, and it was just a bunch of old, like elderly people in there. Okay. So this lady next to me, she's probably, I'm not kidding, Bill, over 80 years old.
Uh-huh.
And she's talking to another lady that's at least 80 years old. And she's like, I love Fox News because it's fair and it's balanced. like, how do you brainwash someone? Like,
all those commercials, it says exactly what it
fair
is.
And balanced. Like, oh man. And so she's, I love it. It's fair and balanced. And then the other lady's like, yeah, I know. And then they're talking about Donald Trump, And then these are like conservative, like you can tell they're Christian. They're talking about their church and all this other stuff. And she goes, what did that late girl call her the other day? Call him. She called Donald Trump. Oh, an MFer. And she like said the whole word. So I'm like working, and she's dropping an F-bomb, this 85-year-old woman. I lose it. I'm like dying laughing. I'm like, how can you say it? Like, and then she's like, did Jimmy start going to church again? And then they're like, oh yeah. I'm so happy he's really doing the right thing. And she's dropping F-bombs, and I'm like, where am I? Like, oh my gosh. But anyways, so lots of stuff going on. But the reason I ask you about your favorite movie in the 80s and all this other stuff.
Wow, we got way off topic.
The reason
politics, fake news.
Gosh. But this is not fake news.
Last week there was. When I reported on Clam Lake, there is no Clam Lake. It is Lake Cadillac. So that was fake news. I did my own research. I was wrong. I wanted to come forward before we got called out for fake news.
It's not Clam Lake. It's not Lake Cadillac.
It is, and I grew up there. That's a sad thing. I should have known this.
Yeah, it happens.
Oh,
it happens. We're not going to start calling you names or anything. But the reason I ask you about that, March 2nd, I think it's the first Saturday in March, we had the Fly Fishing Film Tour that's coming to Grand Rapids. For all of you that are close to Grand Rapids or in Michigan, we would like to get together before the movie, a couple hours before the movie, at a local brewery. So stay tuned for details on that, because we're going to have a great time just hanging out a little bit and getting to know some people before the movie. So this week we have Doug Paton. He's Canadian. We've had some Canadians.
Had a lot of Canadians on this last year.
Yeah, we have had a lot of Canadians. Huh. But anyways,
I like your pause.
Yeah, it's a pregnant pause. So we've had a lot of Canadians on. Doug recently had some photography released with National Geographic Online. He does a great job. He's very great. He's got great content on his websites, and he's just a content creator. So we're very happy that he's here. Welcome to the podcast. Let's light the fire. Today on the Remote No Pressure podcast, we have Douglas Paton. Thank you very much for joining us, Douglas.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff.
Now, you're from the Water Calls blog. You do a lot of writing, and it's a great blog. Yeah, some great content. What made you decide to do a fly fishing blog?
Oh, that is a great question. I had to start writing again. I had to fall in love with writing again, I think is what it was. And I had been, I had two things happen at almost exactly the same time. I burned out as a writer for a profession. I had just done, I don't know what it was. I had a project that really didn't go well, and that kind of started me down the path of maybe I'm not doing the thing that I should be doing, which was really hard to handle because I've been writing professionally for 20 years at this point, and slightly less than that at the time. And at almost the exact same time, I started fly fishing. And as I was taking in all of this information and processing it, I started needing a way of, synthesizing it or doing something with it. And being a writer, I did what I did and what I do, and I just started writing about fishing. And I kind of got back. I fell in love with writing again, actually, as a direct result of doing that, I think.
I've asked this question before on the podcast, Douglas, but why do you think we had Dave Karzinski? We've had a lot of brilliant writers on the podcast that are way smarter than me, and one of them is Dave Karzinski. He writes for the Drake. He was with Orvis from Lure to Fly. He wrote that book, which, by the way, I'm not sponsored by him, but if you guys are using spinning gear, you got to check out From Lure to Fly. And no, I'm not getting paid to say that, but that's a great book, From Lure to Fly. But yeah, so Dave Karzinski, and I've asked this from a lot of people, but like 80 or 90%, I think I read somewhere, of all books written about fishing is about fly fishing. Why do you think? One thing I think a lot of people who fly fish, are the demographic tends to read a lot. Maybe more sentimental group of guys. But why do you think that is? Why do you think so many books have been written about fly fishing versus, say, spinning gear?
I think it's the beauty of it. I think that there's just something about fly fishing, and I got kind of reluctantly dragged into fly fishing, and as soon as I started, I understood it. And as soon as I had a fly rod in my hand and I started practicing the casting, and I saw that loop for the first time, everything kind of made sense. And I was standing in my backyard just practicing because I think everything was frozen at that point, or was in the process of freezing when I got my fly rod. And so I had all kinds of time to just practice, and I would come home after work and I would stand out in my backyard for a little bit and I would just cast, and there's just something about the beauty of it. And then once you get on the water and you're surrounded by nature, which is an excellent way of stimulating that thing inside of a lot of us that causes us to write, and you see, the first trout that you ever get rise to a fly, or the first time that indicator drives under the water, I think it triggers something inside of people. And it certainly did with me, because I not only did I take to fly fishing faster than I've taken to just about anything in my life, it really affected a lot of aspects of what I do, including writing.
It's such, it's like you said, you do it in, like, I grew up on the Gulf Coast down in Texas, and we fished with spoons, with like rubber baits, and then with shrimp. You know, I grew up, fishing with spinning gear, conventional gear, and then I move up here, and then I'm fishing for steelhead, trout, and all that with spinning gear as well. And then when I switched to fly, it's like you said, it was something magical. Like all of a sudden, I had this passion that I didn't have for fishing before. It was like all of a sudden, like there's depth to it, and I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I grew up with a fishing rod in my hand almost all the time, but it was always, it was a bobber and a worm when I was a kid, and then that turned into spinning gear and hard plastics and spoons, and it wasn't until I got the fly rod that everything just kind of shifted on me.
Now, let me ask you this question, Douglas. So, I was reading through your bio, and one of the things you said is you spent a lot of time. You spent a lot of time in Florida, right? Growing up, or your parents went there every summer or something like that?
We spent a fair bit of time in Florida. Yeah, a good friend of my dad's grew up there. A good friend of my dad's that he grew up with moved there at some point in their life. So we would go down and spend like a week or 6 months or something like it. One extreme to the other, really.
Yeah, there's a big difference between I'm thinking like a week or 2 weeks. You're like, well, anywhere between a week and 6 months. So that's a lot of time. Did you do a lot of fishing down there, or?
We did. No, I didn't do as much at the time because I was like 5 years old, I think. In fact, I turned 6 down there, and but it was always something we were doing. My dad and his friend were always fishing, and they were going for lobsters or scuba diving, and like any chance I got, I was right there on the boat with them, and I was so into that whole experience. And then when we started going back as an adult, I was my mid to late 20s, I think, and I understood why he kept going down there. I mean, outside of having friends and everything, but it's an amazing place to kind of learn how to fish and to fish, and it was incredible.
I mean,
it really rekindled.
It's going from
Sorry, go ahead.
It's going from one extreme to another. I mean, from Canada, was it Western Ontario down to Florida? That's a big difference.
No, it really was, and but it was an amazing. It was such a wonderful thing, and it was really great that we were able to do that because we were never really vacation kind of people, but every once in a while we would pack up and drive down to Florida, which was always amazing. Always seemed like a really, and I understand now as an adult that it isn't that unique, but it always struck me as being a very unique thing, especially considering that sometimes we would be down there for months.
What did your parents do for work?
Well, my dad was a truck driver for the better part of 30 years. And my mom, eventually, when she started working again after me and my brother were born, was a secretary. She worked in legal offices and things like that. At the time, somehow my dad got like an extended period of time off of work, and we spent part of the summer on a boat on Georgian Bay, and the rest of the year we spent in Florida. And down there, he washed boats. He cleaned boats for people.
Let me ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever feel like? Did you ever look around at all your friends at school or wherever you grew up, church or whatever, and just say, my life is different than theirs, and we spend there's so much time in Florida or on Georgian Bay and the boat. Did you ever feel weird about that? I mean, it's not.
That's a great question. I always knew I was a little different from everybody else, and that never really that never really bothered me. I mean, I was a bookworm as a kid, which is eventually how I ended up becoming a writer. I was sort of aware of the fact that not everybody had a boat. Not everybody spent their weekends on Georgian Bay, or spent however much time we spent down in Florida. But it was all just kind of, that was my normal experience, and it definitely wasn't for everybody. But you know what though? I have the same life now. I'm very atypical, because I was primary caregiver of my daughter for the longest time because I'm self-employed, and was able to organize my schedule kind of around what she's doing, or whatever level of development she's at. She's only 4 at this point. So for like the better part of 3 years, I did all the daytime stuff. So I was the dad at like all the mom stuff. And I totally understand that weird, like, and it's not even weird. It's just slightly different because I'm in a very blue collar area, and a lot of men aren't looking after their kids like full time, like I was doing. So I'm still very aware of the fact that I live a fairly atypical existence, and I wouldn't want to have it any other way.
Yeah, my neighbor here, he's a great guy. I've got a great neighbor, and he retired from a factory, So the other day, he's awesome guy, good neighbor, and he's just a nice guy. And he comes up to me a couple of weeks ago, and we start talking. And he says, "What exactly do you do?" And I'm like, "Well, I do some weird, I do some weird things, And he said, "I just can't figure out what shift you work." And I was like, "Okay," because that's all he knew. Where I live in Michigan, and his generation was GM. 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7. You got 3 shifts, and that's what you do. And there's a beauty to that. I wish my mind worked that way. But it doesn't, unfortunately. And I just thought it was kind of funny because he's like, "I can't figure out what shift, you work." And I'm like, I don't work a shift, I work, but when you're sleeping at 7:30 at night, I'm interviewing people in British Columbia. So it's a little bit different.
Exactly. And that's what it's like for me. And I get that question fairly often too, where I'll be chatting with someone, and I've run into them 3 or 4 times, or 5 or 6 times, or whatever, and then all of a sudden I'll get that. So, what exactly? Like, do you work? Do you have a job? What do you do for a living? And like, I'm convinced my neighbors, before they got to know me, were sure I was up to something nefarious, because I'm always home. I'm with I'm with my kid, but I'm always around, and it never seems like I'm working. And it creates kind of a series of funny dialogues, I'm sure, inside of the minds of the people who watch somebody who doesn't seem to just visibly working all the time like they are.
Right. Yeah, it's different. I think we'll see more of that too. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, okay? That's not my thing. All right? But, when I look around and I see, like what you're saying, there's patterns, there's people that go to work at the same time. There's a reason there's a traffic jam, people going to work at the same time, people coming home at the same time, people off for the same holidays. It's like, do you think that that's an intentional thing, or do you think that that's something, that culture that we've just created that because of the convenience of, the factory, or the convenience of, shifts, and people just go and do their work and come home at the same time, but everyone does it exactly the same. I mean, do you think that's an intentional? Do you think there's like, I'm being kind of esoteric here, but like, do you think that that's a thing, like a mind control thing, or do you think that that's just how it's kind of happened naturally over time?
I think it's kind of how it happened naturally over time, and I think a lot of it's conditioning. That's what people feel comfortable doing because that's the way it's happened for so long. You can probably go back about 3 generations in some instances, and their grandfather did one way, and the father did it exactly the same way, and now this generation is doing roughly the same thing at probably the same time, going to the same places, and like vacations are a great example of that. And people are really habitual when it comes to their vacations, to the point where, especially in places like where I am, where people will do exactly the same week at exactly the same campground all the time. And as they're leaving the campground, when they're done, they book exactly the same set of weeks for the next season. And my parents see the same thing as like when they run their fishing lodge. They get people the exact same week every year. And these people have been doing the exact same thing for 40 years.
Now, I could do that at a fishing lodge. I mean, if it's you build relationships with people,
right.
the people who own the lodge, and you really become kind of like family, But like we have a church camp down the road that everyone goes to, whose parents attend a certain denomination. And it's almost, they go there every year. The third week of July, we go out with Mom and them, and we set up our RV, and we go to church at night, and then we go to campground or whatever, I couldn't do that one year, let alone 40 years in a row. But
no, I'm the same way.
But, I like to see different things. But a fishing lodge, how did your dad go from truck driver to fishing lodge owner?
He got his pilot's license at the same time, or roughly the same time that my brother got his. And when he kind of retired from his job, he decided that he was going to try and become a pilot somewhere. So he went, what everybody does here is you head north. And he ended up working for the airline that's attached to the fishing lodge that he works at now. And he worked there for a little while and had the opportunity to become the lodge manager. For whatever reason, he passed on it and almost immediately regretted it. And about 2 years later, that opportunity presented itself again, and they took it. And that was 7 years ago, I think.
So do they own it, or is he like a managing partner or something?
They run the main camp. So my dad maintains all the boats and tells people where the fish are biting and this sort of thing. And my mom is kind of like does all the housekeeping and all of that sort of stuff. And they're just the team that runs the lodge, and everybody seems to really love having them there. And they just went through a shift in ownership, and so they're getting used to how somebody else does things, which is kind of throwing a wrench into what we were just talking about, how, people like everything the same. And now all of a sudden some things are different, but they still really love it up there. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, and the fishing is incredible. Absolutely incredible.
My wife and I talked about that a lot, like, in retirement, running a lodge, because we love to host people in our home. It's kind of what we do, but I think that'd be a great gig. You're a little bit older, but you're busy. That's a lot of work, but I mean, it's beautiful.
Well, that's it. And my dad basically gets paid now to do what he would be doing anyways, which is puttering around and chopping wood and tinkering with boats. It's amazing. It's the perfect way for them to kind of, retire essentially.
Yeah, that's awesome. And retirement is for people of our generation. It's like, I can't imagine going back to that shift work mindset, where people retire and then just don't do anything. No, I can't imagine that. I gotta kind of keep doing what I'm doing,
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, what I love about writing is that it's not something that I can realistically age out of. I mean, unless my hands fall off and I simply cannot form a coherent sentence anymore, I should be able to do this until like the very end, which is really kind of comforting to know that I don't have to stop working and suddenly discover a passion for golf or whatever.
With writing, I have this theory. I'm a songwriter. So like my songs now that I'm older are deeper and better than they were when I was a kid. Like not only, I don't know, whatever, but it seems like with writing, you almost get better with age because you have so much more life experience to draw from.
Oh, absolutely. I'm the same way. I mean, I can look back at something that I've written when I was 20 and be pleasantly surprised that it wasn't awful. In fact, I can often look at something and go, that was actually kind of good considering where I was in my life. But at this stage, I know that I am a much better writer than I was at 20. And I know that 10 years from now, I'm going to be able to look back at what I'm doing, and I might not cringe, but I might think, well, I'm really happy to see this improvement. And songwriting and music is definitely the same thing, because it's coming from a very similar place, and it's, when you're 20, your songs are probably very, very similar, and they're all about the 20-year-old experience, and the 20-year-old experience is very, very limited. I mean, every once in a while we get lucky enough to have a very gifted songwriter who seems to be writing beyond their years, and I think Led Zeppelin would be a great example of something like that. But
did you just say rise up? Did you just say rise up, Douglas?
No, I said Led Zeppelin would be a great example of people who are wiser beyond their years.
Yeah. What about Taylor Swift? What about Taylor Swift?
Well, she was a pop artist, which I guess is not much different from what Led Zeppelin would have been at the time, more or less. Oh God, I hope I don't regret saying that.
Yeah, that's going to get some pissed off people, Douglas. Look, no, but seriously, what do you think about Taylor Swift?
I don't know that much about her music, but I think that she's definitely evolving in a way beyond writing songs about simply being with at that point. Because I think, if I'm remembering correctly, a lot of her early stuff was very relationship heavy and very, I don't know, kind of young, I guess. And it sounds like she's only gotten better, and her songwriting is maturing, and she's coming into her own as an artist in a really interesting way. And I say that having only really listened to maybe 2 Taylor Swift songs in my life, one of which I taught to a guitar student. So,
what song was that?
Our Song.
You want to sing a little bit for us, Douglas? Or not?
I don't know the words.
I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding, bro. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to the Remote No Pressure podcast. Just taking a little break from the show, from the interview. Just want to let you guys know what's going on here at the podcast. We are going to be getting together on March the 2nd in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a little bit before the Fly Fishing Film Tour at a local brewery. Stay tuned for details on that. We're very excited. So if you're in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area on March 2nd, we'd love to hang out with you. Also, be sure to go to our website, follow us on Instagram, and sign up for our email list as well. We got some really cool things coming with our email list over the next few months. So if you're not on the mailing list, go sign up for it at remotenopressure.com. Also, we'd like to let you know, floodtideco.com, Paul Puckett Art and those guys at Floodtide have offered our listeners a 25% discount when you type in Remote No Pressure at checkout. Again, that's 25% discount when you go to floodtideco.com and type in Remote No Pressure at checkout. We're very excited to offer that to our listeners, and it's very awesome for them to do that. So be sure to go check them out. Now back to our show. So what kind of stuff do you write? I mean, I know you do content management, or I mean you do your blog, but what else do you write?
I largely do content marketing, which is like blog posts and other assorted internet-based marketing content. But I do, as much as I can, I try to do fly fishing writing. If I can find someone who's willing to kind of work with me, I'm always excited to work with different fly fishing companies. I've done some work with Bozeman Fly Works out of Montana, and the Fly Crate, which is one of the fly fishing subscription companies. And I do that just because I love it. Like, it's just so much fun to get to sit down and write about fly fishing, and people are usually fairly eager to work with people, because I find, and I see like a lot of, how can I say this? A lot of people end up getting sucked into writing who aren't necessarily writers. And it happens a lot in fishing and actually in sports in general. I think a lot of people end up writing because somebody's just given them a lot of money to write a book or to write an article or something. And they rely on the fact that they have this name to kind of get the recognition out there. And there's a lack of people who are actually really good at writing. And it was one of those guys who happened to be good at writing that really sucked me into being open to the idea of writing about fishing, and who ultimately kind of got me fly fishing in a way. And that was a guy by the name of Roderick Haig Brown, who I just wandered into the library here in Summerland one day, and I thought, I need something different to read. Let's see if there's anything about fishing. And I grabbed this book off the shelf called The River Never Sleeps, and I read about 3 chapters, and I had to take it back because I knew that there was no way I was ever going to give the library their book back. It was beautifully written, and it completely sold me on the idea of fishing in rivers and using flies, and it was glorious. So I had to take it back, and I eventually got it. I think I got it that Christmas, and slowly made my way through it. It was just such a beautiful, rich book, and incredibly well written. And so that's what I like to do. I mean, I'm not on the same level as Haig Brown by any means, but it's just nice to be like a professional writer in an area where there aren't necessarily, I mean, I'm starting to sound arrogant, but I mean, it's one of those markets where, like I said, where all these people get, they have a huge social media following, and someone says, hey, can you write this article? And it's not as good as it could be. And right. I can read it, and I think there's a lot of potential here. If this person were to just tighten up a few things or stop doing this or that. And, but that's just the writer in me thinking like how this could be a better article. And sometimes I can't stop doing that every bit as much as I would like to. And it's like seeing a really crappy cover band and you're thinking like, there's just so many ways this could be better. But yet they're the ones on stage having the opportunity to perform for like this huge crowd of people.
Right. Have you read Stephen King's book called On Writing?
Yes, I have. Actually, it's a fantastic book.
That book is brilliant. And I don't write like you do. I write songs and stuff, but like if you want to see the ultimate train wreck that would probably drive you crazy, go ahead to remotenопроpressure.com and sign up for our mailing list, Douglas. And you will see
I'm already on the mailing list.
Oh, okay. So that probably drives you absolutely bonkers. Because I'm not a great writer, but I read that book On Writing, and it reads like a novel, dude. I mean, that's like,
yeah.
And he talks a lot about getting to the point, and I read a lot of Hemingway, and if you read Hemingway, there were some sentences that were 2 words, like don't waste all the space, get to the frickin' point, and that's one of the main things I took away from that book. But what did you think about that book?
On Writing was it was a great book. It's one of the few books on writing that I've actually really enjoyed because it wasn't just kind of like a lecture on the page. It was, here's a really intense look at how I do things, and here's how you can kind of use these skills and to become a better writer yourself. And it was really well written because it's Stephen King. And it was beautiful. I haven't read it in, I don't think I read it since it came out, but I'm probably due for a reread at this point. And like I said, it's one of the two books about writing that I really that really had an effect on me as a young writer.
You ever read books like, say, To Kill a Mockingbird or Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men when you're in school? And you don't know anything about life. And then you read them as an adult and you're like, holy crap, that's brilliant.
I've had sort of the opposite effect, actually, because I really liked Of Mice and Men when I read it. And I think it was 15 or something like that. But I read A Catcher in the Rye when I was in my 20s. And it didn't resonate with me at all. The way that a lot of people get that, because a lot of people read it in high school, and I somehow managed to sneak through high school without having read it. And it was a good book, but it didn't have that effect on me that I think it would have had if I'd been an angsty teenager when I'd read it.
How old are you, Douglas?
I'll be 38 in November.
Okay, so you grew up in the angsty 90s.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
The 90s were super. My wife and I were watching that. What was it called? Hollywood Records or something?
Oh, Empire Records.
Yeah, my wife and I were watching Empire Records last night on Netflix. It's like, God, we were so angsty in the 90s. Why were we? What were we so angsty about? You know. So I'm surprised Catcher in the Rye didn't resonate with you. Maybe it's all that time you spent on the boat. You know.
I was, yeah, but it was 2003, I think, before I read Catcher in the Rye, and we were over the angst.
We were over the angst, you know. Why were we so angsty in the 90s?
I don't know. It was a pushback from all of that weird, excessive happiness of the 80s, I think. From all the really drippy pop music that was very popular at the time, and then Kurt Cobain came onto the scene with grunge, and I think that was kind of the thing that made everybody realize that it's okay to be a little unhappy about things and sarcastic and what have you.
Kurt Cobain. What did you think about Nirvana?
What was that?
What did you think about Nirvana? Did you like Kurt Cobain?
I didn't really listen to them a lot. I had this weird thing where just as all of that was taking off, I moved to Northern Ontario and got kind of completely removed from popular culture for about 5 years. So that whole thing just kind of went right by me. And I found reasons of my own to be kind of angsty and depressed as a teenager, but I totally missed the whole grunge movement somehow.
What kind of music were you into?
Oh God. At the time I was listening to, a lot of classical music and stuff like that. A lot of classic rock as well. The classical came from being a pianist and a classically trained piano player. And so I had this love of just really melodic music and listening to guys like Beethoven and Edvard Grieg and things like that. And then there was the classic rock kind of thing that came out of my dad, who was a teenager in the 70s. And it was a weird kind of butting of heads in terms of musical style. I didn't really develop, I don't think I really developed the musical sensibilities of my own until I was almost 20 and well into my 20s. And I started really discovering music that spoke to me directly, as opposed to just being the things that I had around me and at my disposal.
What do you listen to now?
Oh, I have a handful of bands that I listen to. I listen to a band called the Old 97 out of Texas. Big fan of them. And a band called Black and the Rodeo Kings out of, well, they're all Canadian, but they're all different parts of Canada, but they're this weird kind of Canadian roots music supergroup as they get billed. And it's just these three really, really talented songwriters and some just fantastic musicianship that happens when they get on stage together.
Well, is it like is like folky Texas music kind of like, or is it when you say supergroup? Are you talking like Dream Theater type thing, or like?
More folksy. The guitar player, one of the guitar players, I guess they all play guitar in the group, but one of the guys is a guy by the name of Colin Linden who met Howling Wolf and was friends with Howling Wolf when he was 11, and was kind of a superstar on the Canadian blues and roots scene for decades. In fact, he now plays, or he was playing with the cast of Nashville. He was the musical director of that show. So he's gone on to some pretty big and impressive things, and has played with Bob Dylan and you name it. He's been on stage with them forever. He played with Emmylou Harris for a year, I think.
What do you think about that whole Emmylou? What is her name? Emmylou Harris.
Emmylou Harris.
Emmylou Harris. What do you think about that? Like her comeback and her like going.
I'm not super familiar with her music, but I love seeing that these people are like these stars who've been around forever are still out there kind of making their money, doing their thing and persisting with music the way that they are. Like I had I had an opportunity to see Steve Earle do a bit of Copperhead Road recently, which was really cool to kind of see that, him celebrating, and what was it, the 30th release of Copperhead Road, I think?
Oh, yeah, at least the 30th, yeah.
Or maybe even the 40th, but it's just so neat to see that, like, these people who've released these really amazing albums are still capable of performing them, and are still, like, people still just flock to see them. I mean, Steve Earle had, I think, standing room only in the place where he was playing.
Oh yeah, I would go. Yeah, that'd be amazing to see. Yesterday, I was just watching Netflix, or no, it was YouTube, and I'm a big Willie Nelson fan, obviously, because I'm from Texas, and he's I think one of the most prolific songwriters. So yesterday, I'm watching YouTube. And obviously, I'm a Willie Nelson fan. And Willie Nelson has a song that's been covered by like tons of people called Funny How Time Slips Away. Are you familiar with that tune or not?
What was it called?
Funny How Time Slips Away.
Oh, you know what? I'm not.
Okay. Well, it's been covered by Dave Matthews Band. Dave Matthews has been covered by a ton of people. But then I stumbled across his son. I think his name is Luke Nelson.
Oh, Lucas.
Yeah. And he did the song, he covered it, and I'm like, holy crap, it's like the ghost of his dad. I mean, his dad's still alive, obviously, so I'm not saying, but yeah. I'm like, holy cow, and it was the best cover. Like, I think it was better than Willie's, to be honest with you. Don't tell Willie I said that. I mean, it's not like we're good friends or anything, but just in case you come across him.
I've heard his son is really starting to come into his own as a musician.
Oh yeah.
My brother-in-law opened for him a couple of years ago at a music festival, and he said that the shift between now and then is so remarkable that it was almost as if it were different people.
Yeah,
it's just so neat to see that, and that comes back to that growth that as you get older and as you practice your craft, and you become more and more true. I think true to yourself as you get older and mature as an artist.
Why is that so hard for people to be? I think some people go through their entire life not being true to themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that's so hard to do?
That is an excellent question. I think a lot of it is pressure. I think a lot of people feel the need to kind of live the life that is expected of them and not necessarily the life that they want to be living. And people also don't necessarily know what it is that they want to do. They just kind of start doing something, and 30 years pass and they're still doing it, and they didn't even really stop long enough to ask whether they wanted to do it or not. I mean, it's very hard to kind of acknowledge that you're doing something that you're not enjoying. And that's what kind of happened to me when I almost stopped writing. Is I was at a moment where I thought I had the perfect project. I wrote a textbook. I thought, this is perfect. This is everything that I want to be doing. And it turned out to not be even close to what I wanted to be doing. And it took a lot of thinking to kind of realize that I still want to be writing. I just don't want to be writing this anymore, because there's something here that doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like I'm using my skills to the best of my abilities. And a lot of people never really stop to think about that, because we're creatures of habit. We do the same thing. Again, as we talked about, we do the same thing every day, every week, every year. Our vacations are often very similar, and it's easy to just kind of disappear into your habit and reemerge as an old person, never really having stopped to think about whether you want to be doing that or not.
Like I was saying earlier, I wish I could do that. I wish I could turn myself off and sink into life like that. But I think some brains just work differently than others, Yeah. I think it's kind of a blessing. It's kind of a blessing and a curse kind of to be this way, because I don't know if it's ADD or whatever, but I'm always questioning, and it annoys a lot of people around me. But maybe that's why I interview people, Douglas, so I can ask a bunch of questions.
Yeah, well, it is. And, that's what I really love about fishing, and about fly fishing in particular, is that it forces me to slow down and to stop and to pay attention to what I'm doing and to think about the things that I'm doing and to see what I'm doing and how I'm reacting to the situation as it presents itself. Because otherwise I would hit a stretch of river or something, or a lake, and I'd be there 15 or 20 minutes. I think, okay, this isn't working. And I'd be tempted to just turn around and leave. And I can't do that because half the time it's taken me 2 or 3 hours to get to where I'm going. Sometimes it even involves quite a bit of a hike, or I have to force myself to have the patience to sit there and to work that stretch of water thoroughly and carefully and to actually enjoy what I'm doing, because it's why I'm there. I'm not just there to catch a fish and go home. I'm there to sort of spend a day and relax and enjoy nature and enjoy the solitude or the company of a friend if I'm with a friend. And so that's the nice thing about fishing, is that it forces me to do those things.
Tell me about the polar bear encounter. I was reading that. I'm like, that's good. That's gold right there. Can you tell us a little bit about? Because I've never ran into a polar bear ever, because I've never been in that climate. No, but what happened? What happened?
I was on a canoe trip with my brother in Northern Ontario, and we were doing the Fawn and Severn rivers, which end up dumping into Hudson's Bay. And it was a trip. We had kind of 10 days set aside to do this canoe trip, which is about how long it was supposed to have taken us. And it ended up taking us half the amount of time because the bugs were so bad that we just didn't stop. But on, I think it was on about the 4th day of our trip, we were paddling along, and we hadn't seen anybody for 3 days at this point. And we were paddling, and we'd been kind of chasing these ducks down the water for hours at this point, to the point where we didn't even really notice that they were there anymore. And way off in the distance on the far side of the river, I see this little splash and something white hanging out in the water. And I'm like, oh, it's just another duck. And I don't think about it. I don't mention it. I just keep paddling. And then maybe 5 minutes later, my brother just starts screaming, and this duck has stood up in the middle of the river. And we're like, oh shit, this is really bad, because we're in a canoe in the absolute middle of nowhere. And the thing that really makes this scary, especially at the time, is that we have a gun, but we have a .22.
Yeah, that's not going to
work. And exactly. So I'm like, oh crap. I might as well be just like chucking bullets at this thing for all that it's going to do. And luckily, and really this is immense, like so very lucky that this worked out the way that it did. The polar bear did not like the sound of the gunshot. So I fired a couple of rounds into the air, and it turned around, and in probably half the time, if not less, it took to get to us, it was back on the other side of the river and like snorting at us from the banks. But it got to within about 50 or 60 yards of us.
That's just crazy, man.
Pretty damn scary. Yeah, exactly. So, I always like to say that you probably could have water skied behind the canoe after that encounter. We were just head down paddling. And there was no way that we were going to stop until we absolutely had to. But that was outside of that polar bear encounter, the one thing that we'd hoped to do on that trip was catch fish and eat fish the whole time. So we kind of tacked it, thinking everywhere we go, we're going to get either walleye or Arctic char, which were supposed to have been in that system. And we caught one fish the whole time we were there. And when we finally ran into somebody, we made some comment about hoping to catch Arctic char. He's like, oh no, not this time of year. So we were just, yeah, exactly. So it was just a totally, just one of those trips.
Yeah, we've all been on those. Yeah, totally get it. Well, thank you.
But I would love to. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say I would love to do that trip again though with fly rods, because I have a feeling that it would be a very different experience. This was back before I'd started fly fishing, and we had just like jigs and spoons and stuff like that. Maybe I think we only had one fishing rod, maybe. But but my brother and I have both since gotten into fly fishing, and I think it would be a very interesting experience to kind of retrace our steps on that trip with a fly rod to see how different it would be.
Yeah, I could. That would be crazy. Well, thank you very much for hanging out with us, Douglas. What's next for you? I mean, are you working on any big projects right now, or are you just focusing on your blog, or can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in your life right now?
Well, I need to start writing on the blog again. Actually, I've fallen away from it. I don't know if I've done anything since the spring of this year, but I need to get back to writing on the blog more. There's all sorts of things that have happened in my life from a fishing perspective that I need to kind of revisit. And I just finished doing some writing for National Geographic. The first piece came out two weeks ago, maybe, and I have 2 more articles that are going to be coming out through them over the next little while. I'm not quite sure what the release schedule is, and one of them is actually about fishing, which is kind of exciting.
It's awesome.
Yeah, and aside from that, just try and do as much writing and as much fishing as I can. It's almost my entire life mission.
Well, that's great. If people wanted to find you or get a hold of you, Douglas, how would they do that?
Easiest way would be to visit my the website, thewatercalls.ca. All of my contact information is there, and I'm on Instagram as well as @thewatercalls, which is _water_calls. And I'm always on there, and I'm usually posting. I try to post fairly regularly, and I always happy to talk to people. It's always neat to meet other anglers. It's amazing how much we talk and how much people are willing to kind of just chat with you on Instagram. Like, I've made a couple of really decent friends since I started being on Instagram. And as somebody who's not a huge fan of social media, it's nice to see that happening, and it's especially nice to see anglers kind of being pleasant about it, because I find, like, on Facebook, it's just a total free-for-all, and nobody seems to really want to be pleasant or help out other anglers and things like that. So it's really nice to see that there's a community of other fly fishers and who are really engaging and just looking to help and talk to other people.
Absolutely. Well, we'll put those links up in our show notes. And we really appreciate you coming on the show, Douglas, and thank you very much. We really thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Great to be on.
Well, thank you, Douglas, and thank you for joining us on another episode of the Remote No Pressure Podcast. Be sure to check out our website, our Facebook, our Instagram, and more than anything, sign up for our mailing list, because sometimes algorithms change and we can't get a hold of you. So if you sign up for our mailing list, you can always stay in touch. And until next time, go fishing.